Good evening, everyone. And it's a pleasure to have everyone here this evening. Happy Hanukkah, Hanukkah Sameach. Normally, Shabbat Hanukkah is Miketz. This year, Miketz falls just after Hanukkah, but it is certainly the theme of Hanukkah week, the Seder of Miketz. And what a Seder it is. Last week, we looked at Vayeshev, which was the first part of the Joseph story. This week, Miketz, the second part of the Joseph story. But you can't really look at Miketz without looking at Vayeshev again, or even thinking about Vayigash, which comes next. And that's what we're going to do tonight. I want to start with something slightly different, though, because I had an email a few minutes ago, actually, from one of our former members who now lives in America, a young man called Jonathan Abelson, who I've known since before his bar mitzvah. It's just a pleasure to have kept up with Jonathan all these years. And Jonathan is better at making PowerPoints than I am. And he sent me a short introductory PowerPoint to this week's Seder, which I really thought was quite charming.
Can you see Jonathan's logged on?
He has logged on, indeed.
Hello.
And it's a pleasure to have you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So here we are. First of all, do you remember this? This is what our shul looked like before lockdown. There you are, better view. That's what it looked like before lockdown. As we say every time we put Sefer Torah, we look forward to the day when it will look like that again. But for the moment, it is what it is. And here's an introduction to Miketz, which Jonathan has put together really nicely. As we can see, Yosef interprets Pharaoh's dream. The backstory, Yosef spent 12 years in prison, 10 years to a term of speaking Lashon Hara about his 10 brothers. That's pretty severe. And 2 years as a punishment for asking the chief butler, remember me and mention me to Pharaoh. We'll look at that a bit later. Now, Pharaoh has 2 dreams. 7 fat cows are swallowed up by 7 lean cows. 7 fat ears of grain swallowed by 7 lean ears. Both dreams signify one and the same thing. What is that? Hashem will bring 7 years of plenty upon Egypt. Hashem brings 7 years of famine upon Egypt. And Yosef advises Pharaoh to store grain during the plentiful years. Actually, it looks like he has 2 dreams, but he knows it's really one dream. And that's why he will not accept the interpretation of his wise men, because they said it's 2 dreams. But that's another story. And here he is, he's appointed Egyptian viceroy. So when he comes into the story, presumably he looks like the figure on the right. By the time he walks out over Egypt, he looks like the figure on the left. So don't wonder, therefore, why his brothers didn't recognize him. So thank you, Jonathan, for that. What an amazing introduction to Miketz. I'm going to give a different kind of introduction, as you'll see, not as grand as your presentation. And you may even wonder at the kind of introduction that I'm giving, but let's have a look. So here we are. Okay, I've called it Joseph Part 2, the real story, 4 central themes that we're going to be looking at tonight. Number 1, God is the co-author of our script. Number 2, the role of clothes in Jacob's family. 5 different cases. Number 3, Joseph, the story of Joseph is really a metaphor for the Jewish story, and we'll see how. And number 4, in certain ways, most importantly, the key words running through the story from the beginning to the end, key words and their role. We'll have a look at all of these things coming up. So look what I've done with the summary. I put it all in one paragraph. Here we go. Pharaoh's dreams of cows and corn. Joseph rushed out of prison. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams of years of plenty, followed by years of famine, and proposes how to cope. His proposal is accepted. Pharaoh appoints Joseph as a viceroy of Egypt, age 30, gives him a wife, and he has 2 sons. The famine starts. Jacob sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt to buy some grain. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. He treats them harshly, accuses them of spying, jails them for 3 days, and then lets them go, except for Shimon. Tells the rest that they can go, but next time they have to return with Benjamin. Well, Jacob takes a lot of persuasion. There's Reuben, there's Judah, their roles. Jacob reluctantly agrees. And back in Egypt a second time, Joseph treats Benjamin kindly, but then the goblet is found in his sack. And the Sedra ends with Joseph saying that Benjamin must remain in Egypt and the rest can go home. Dreams, cows, corn, plenty, famine, yes, no, Pharaoh, brothers, Canaan, Egypt, back to Canaan, back to Egypt. Why did I put it here in one paragraph? All in one paragraph. Why did I do that? You know why? Because that is how it is presented in the Torah. And just to focus on that for a moment, Miketz is one of only 2 Torah portions. That's one paragraph. It's 6 columns long. I must tell you, the one reading from the Torah this Shabbat always struggles to find the place when someone else is called up, because there are no paragraph breaks. And the question, of course, is why are there no paragraph breaks? Last week, Vayeshev, every saga of Joseph's life had a new paragraph. And here, it's one long paragraph. It doesn't matter whether it's the dreams, the interpretations, that the years of plenty beginning, years of famine beginning, Joseph has 2 sons, the births. Back in Canaan, the land of Israel, with Jacob and sons, then they're in Egypt, then they're back there, you know, back and forward like windscreen wipers. But it's one paragraph. So the very beginning, Pharaoh's dream, and the very end, Judah starts making a speech. It's all in one paragraph, which means that everything is linked together. That has to be the message. And what I want to do this evening is show 4 different themes that work their way from actually really from before the beginning of the Sedra until after the end, for the most part. And they all coalesce in a major way in the Sedra of Miketz. So without any further ado, let us go to the first theme. So here we are. So Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, he writes on this first thing that I want to talk about tonight. God is the co-author of our script. And he first points out, as we go, almost everything that happens in Joseph's life falls into 2 categories. The first are the things done to him. He's given the coat of many colors. He is Jacob's favorite son. He is sent to his brothers to find out how they're getting on with their flocks around Shechem. The brothers throw him into a pit. He is sold as a slave. He is almost seduced by Potiphar's wife. He is accused of rape. He is thrown into jail. He is a victim of circumstances. not entirely of circumstances, as Jonathan indicated in the summary earlier, but nonetheless, you can see a lot of things are done to him. And they have something in common. When you look at all of these sources, you will not find God's name mentioned. So let's look at the next one. Of course, Joseph does do things. He runs Potiphar's household. He's bought by Potiphar as a slave, but Potiphar quickly realizes he's got himself a bargain here, a good man. Joseph is capable, and he runs Potiphar's household. As we said, he gets falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and he is thrown into jail. He's appointed, however, by the chief jailer as the organizer of the prisoners. And whilst in jail, he interprets the butler's dream and the baker's dream. See, however, the difference between where he is, where things are done to him, and where he is active. Here we are, here are the verses. Here's Joseph in Potiphar's house. This is not a full quote, but it gives us the idea. This is from last week's portion. God was with Joseph, and he made him very successful. Soon he was working in his master's own house. His master realized that God was with Joseph, and that God granted success to do everything he did. Joseph in prison. God was with Joseph, showed him kindness, making him find favor with the warden of the dungeon. God was with Joseph, and God granted him success in everything he did. And finally, Joseph interpreting dreams. Interpretations are God, replied Joseph to the butler and the baker. Tell me your dreams. So all these stages where he's active in last week's portion, with the notable exception of the Lashon Hara that he spoke at the beginning, but in all these other things, God is very much present. In fact, even when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, he said, I cannot sin before God. So even there, he invoked God. Where he's active, and there he was active because he ran out, he invokes God. The exception, however, is relying on the butler for his freedom. And there is a Rashi at the end of last week, which is a troubling Rashi based on the Midrash, and Jonathan indicated on his summary, a troubling Rashi, where Rashi said, why did the butler forget him? And he was in jail for 2 more years. This week's parasha opens, Vahi Miket Shanatayim Yamim. It was exactly at the end of 2 years of days, every single day, 2 full years. Pharaoh's birthday, that Pharaoh had the dreams and Joseph got out. Why was he punished for the 2 years? Because he relied on the butler for his freedom. So this can be a little bit troubling for us. And let's think about this for a moment. After all, we have a principle of what we call hishtadlut. We have to make an effort. No one can get by in life without making an effort in whatever is required. And we understand that. And we understand, you know, the old saying, God helps those who help themselves. My mother used to say that, which was quickly followed up by, and God help those that catch helping themselves. But that's something else. God helps those who help themselves, but it's a Jewish ideal. We should know it's a Jewish ideal. We have to have hishtadlut. So what was it that Joseph did that was so wrong? We understand the question. In a sense, we've got a beginning of the answer, because with all the other things he did, he invoked God's name. And here, God's name is missing. It looks like he tried to go it alone at this point. But let's now return to our PowerPoint and see what principles we glean from here. And lovely, powerful ideas from Rabbi Sachs as follows. What we want to happen, happens, but not always when we expect or in the way we expect. God is the co-author of the script of our life. And sometimes, as here, he reminds us of this by making us wait and then by taking us by surprise. Without Joseph's acts, his interpretation of the butler's dream, and his plea for freedom, he would not have left prison. So he wasn't wrong to ask for that butler he should go free, because he wouldn't have left without that. The butler then spoke to Pharaoh when the time came 2 years later. But without divine intervention in the form of Pharaoh's dreams, it also would not have happened. So although we say there should be hishtadlut, trying, we have to understand that that is one aspect. But without God alongside us, the co-author of our script, it wouldn't have happened. I want to go straight to the second aspect, quite different, completely different. The subject of clothes in Jacob's family. So what happens in this week's portion? The brothers come to Egypt. Joseph is dressed like an Egyptian, and he's speaking through an interpreter. And the last person the brothers expect to see in that kind of position is their brother Joseph. Last they heard of him, he was sold as a slave. And look what happens. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Why not? Because of his clothes. Again, quoting Rabbi Sachs, the encounter between Joseph and his brothers is the fifth in a series of stories in which clothes play a key role, and they all facilitate deception. Jacob, when he went to his father, pretended to be Esau to get the blessings, dressed in Esau's clothes. Joseph's coat, which the brothers sent to their father, is stained in blood. And as we'll see later on, it was sent to Jacob to have a look, to draw the conclusion that Joseph was dead. Again, clothes deception. Last week, we looked at the story of Judah and Tamar, and Tamar's disguise was with clothes. Here also to deceive. When Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, the only way he could get out of her grasp was to pull his hands out of his sleeves, and she was left holding his robe. And that was used to deceive Potiphar. And finally, to where we are in this case, and that is Joseph's high-ranking Egyptian clothes. His brothers simply don't recognize him. Appearances deceive. Let's go sideways just for a moment. Just for a moment, appearances deceive. Saul and David. Anyone know what King Saul looked like? Absolutely. He was tall, broad, handsome. He was a head taller than everyone else. You couldn't help look at the man, really handsome, dashing looks, fit for royalty. Anyone know what David looked like? Short, redhead, curly hair, redhead, a bit different. In fact, so different that he was out with the sheep when Samuel turned up looking for the son of Jesse to anoint as king. And Jesse's oldest son looked like Saul. And Samuel thought, this is the one. but he had a connection with God. God said, no, 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 not this one, not this one, not this one. He went through 7. He said to Jesse, aren't there any more? Oh, well, yeah, not him. Well, you better call him in. Yes, it's him. Looks can deceive. Clothing can deceive, and so can looks. So we need to keep these sorts of things in mind. The Hebrew word for garment is beged. But you know, it's also the same Hebrew word for betrayal. As in, we say the confessional prayers on Yom Kippur, Ashamnu Bagadnu. The second one, Bagadnu, is like beged. Clothes betray. To have a deep understanding of God or of human beings, we need to listen more than to look. Pay attention to what goes on, not just to look at something superficially. This is one of Rabbi Sacks's big things, that the root shama it features much more in Jewish thought than ro'eh, which is to see. It's also important to see, but shomea is much more important. So that's the theme of clothes, which runs right through to deceive. I'd like to think that one thing that comes to an end, but it really only comes to an end right at the end of Vayechi, an end of deception, with clothes or with any other way. The brothers did try it once more. They said, after Jacob died, they said to Joseph, you know, our father wanted us to ask you that you should forgive us. Joseph knew it wasn't true. He forgave them anyway, but no more deception. This third point, which is a small point, but a powerful one. So going back to, we said before, Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Why didn't they recognize him? Well, we said before, it was the clothes. But let's look at this again. So the brothers had got rid of Joseph years ago. Now they're facing a stranger in a strange land, and it simply does not occur to them that this man might be Joseph. As far as they're concerned, there is no Joseph. And listen, these are the words of Rabbi Sacks. Quite upsetting words. They don't recognize him now. They never did. They never recognized him as one of them, as their father's child, as their brother with an identity of his own. Joseph is the Jewish people throughout history. Let's focus on that for a moment. Because in a way, Rabbi Sacks here is saying two things. Number one, we Jews internally often get this wrong. We attach labels to different groups of Jews, and we thereby exclude them. Nothing to do with me. And that's what the brothers essentially did with Joseph. What did Rabbi Sacks write? They didn't recognize him now. They didn't recognize him then. They never did recognize him. Why would they recognize him now? And I would add to that, is it not so, even in today's world, that there are groups of Jews we don't recognize? When I say we don't recognize, of course we know they exist, but they're so different from us. They either in inverted commas, keep nothing, or they're what we call meshuggah frum. They're extremists, they're this and they're that. And we comfort ourselves with saying, well, that's not the way we conduct our lives, not part of us. Looks like that's a sin of Joseph and his brothers. But Rabbi Sacks is saying a second thing. that Joseph and his brothers is a metaphor for Israel and the nations. After all, Joseph went to inquire about his brothers. Hey guys, how are you getting on? What did they do? They threw him in the pit. They would have killed him, except one person stood up for him. Reuben stood up for him. Is that not the story often of the Jews through the ages? Jews go to a country, how can we help? How can we do this? No, we hate you. Israel in the Middle East, well, I'd like to think it's changing slightly today. There's a number of peace agreements, but they're not so much with neighbors. And, we can make this better for all of us. No, we hate you. So Joseph and his brothers is a metaphor for Israel and the nations. And just remember, we introduced the concept weeks ago, Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim. What happens to the fathers happens to the children. Not just what happened to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but even to Joseph too. Okay, let us now move on to the last part of what I want to discuss this evening. And that is key words that occur through the story. And the first word we're going to look at is one that you're very familiar with, and this word must be one of the most frequent throughout the book of Bereshit. And the word is ach. Ach means brother. Sometimes it uses achot, which is sister. So you could say it means brother, sister, brotherhood, family relations. Think about Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Isaac and Ishmael, Joseph and his brothers. And every time we get these stories, the word ach, the Torah uses the word ach, brother, many, many, many times. God said to Cain, Hevel achicha, where is Hevel, your brother? And what does Cain say? Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? These dreadful words. And again, one of Rabbi Sachs's themes is, this is a recurring theme in Bereshit, and we gradually reach a healing, such that Joseph and his brothers are reconciled at the end, which is a big thing. But it's work in progress through Bereshit. So ach is a word that occurs many, many times in the Joseph story, and we'll look at a couple of uses in a moment. The second word we're going to look at is the word shalach. We've heard of Cedras with that name, b'shalach, shalach lecha. It means to send. We'll look at a number of incidences of this one sent that one in the Joseph story. But who is really doing the sending? And the third root, which might be less well known, is the word pakad. Pakad is to appoint, could even mean to count. It has quite a few meanings. And we'll see the use of this word too as it progresses through the Joseph story, with particular interest, by the way, in the words shalach and pakad, but even the word ach. Now, I don't know how many times the word ach occurs in Joseph's story. It takes too long to count because there's so many of them. But even the word shalach, to send, occurs 17 times. And the word pakad occurs 10 times. And they are keys to understanding the progression of the story. So let's look at the first one. Okay, now, as I said, it occurs many times. We really can't go through all of them, but here's one paragraph in this week's Sedra, And we wonder what the word ach is even doing there. Jacob, the famine has hit. And it's not only hit Egypt, it's hit Canaan where the family lived. So Jacob says to his sons, go to Egypt. We would expect to see Jacob's sons go off to Egypt. That's not what it says. Jacob saw there were provisions in Egypt and he said, go down there and get us provisions from there so we may live and not die. Then Joseph's 10 brothers went down to get provisions of grain from Egypt. Where did that come from? Joseph's 10 brothers, they haven't heard about Joseph for more than 20 years. Suddenly it's Joseph's 10 brothers. Joseph and 10 went down to get provisions of grain from Egypt, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob did not send with his brothers, for he thought he might meet disaster. Thus the sons of Israel came to get provisions among the others who had come. Why does the Torah suddenly slip in this business of Joseph's 10 brothers going to Egypt? And what about Benjamin? Benjamin described as Joseph's brother. Thank you. I know that Benjamin is Joseph's brother. Why is the Torah telling me this? And why does it say Jacob did not send with them? It repeats the word brothers again. So just the use of the word brothers 3 times here is conveying to us some messages. Perhaps the central message is this: the main purpose of their journey, but they don't know it, they think they're going to buy grain, is to reopen and resolve the relationships within the family. This is a very powerful thing. Joseph's 10 brothers, the 10 brothers who sold him into slavery, are the ones going down. Benjamin is Joseph's brother, of course, not only with his father, but also with his mother. And Jacob didn't send down, for he thought he might meet disaster. Why might Benjamin meet disaster? We said last week that there was something within Jacob's mind that even though he saw the torn coat with blood on it, there was something in his mind that didn't totally accept what he had seen, which is why he couldn't be comforted, which is why he refused to be comforted. And the thought of sending Benjamin down, he doesn't say here, why not? But the Torah tells us what's in his mind. God forbid something will happen to him. Later on in the parasha, when the brothers say we have to take Benjamin down, and then Jacob reflects aloud and he says, Joseph disappeared. I said, Ach tarov taraf, he's surely been torn apart. Now you want to take this one, and if something happens to him, it's the end. So the word, the emotive use of brother here, number one, is conveying that they are going to Egypt. They think they're going to buy food. It's not the case. Well, they are going to buy food. Actually, it's not the case because they get their money back. They're given the food. So number one, they think they're going to buy food, but they're not. They are going in for a rough ride, at the end of which there'll be reconciliation. And the other use of the word brother, of course, is Benjamin, very precious brother to Joseph. He wasn't involved in the sale, remember? Different category. Okay, let's go back to the screen. To the second of the words, shlach. So 17 examples, but I'm not going to give all of them here, just a few of them. And I've put them in bold. I've also put another word in bold, as we'll see. So, Vayomer Yisrael El Yosef. Israel said to Joseph, why is this Israel? This is the last big surgery, we won't go into it. But he said, your brothers are looking after their sheep in Shechem. Lecha, go veshlachacha alehem. I will send you to them. And then the next verse, Vaishlachehu. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. Who's doing the sending here? Jacob. The brothers do their dastardly deed. They dip the coat, Joseph's coat, in the blood of the goat, and it says, Vaishalchu et ketonet pasim. They sent the coat to their father. And they said, we found this, please examine it. Is it your son's tunic or not? And we know what happened. Who's doing the sending here? The brothers. This week's portion, Vaishlach Paro, Pharaoh sends for Joseph. And look at this, Vayiritzu min habor, and they rushed him from the dungeon, literally pit. You know, the description in last week's portion is not pit to describe the jail. It is Beit HaSoar. Beit HaSoar means prison. What's this pit? I just put this in brackets. The brothers put him in a pit. And for 13 years, from the age of 17 to the age of 30, except for a brief window in Potiphar's house, and it was very brief, he was in jail. He was in the pit, as it were. Vayiritzu min habor, and they rushed him from the pit to go and see Pharaoh. The Italian commentator Sforno says something very nice on this verse. He said, when our future redemption comes, it's going to come as quick as that. One day it's awful, and then suddenly, bang, things are brilliant. Who did the sending there? It's Pharaoh. So we've got Jacob, the brothers, Pharaoh. And then we're back to Jacob, who didn't send. Vet Binyamin achi Yosef lo shalach Yaakov. This time, Jacob did not send Benjamin with his brothers because he feared he might meet disaster, as we saw just now. Now some more examples of sending with a difference. When Jacob finally agrees to send Binyamin, for the first time in all these sendings, we have God's name invoked. V'el Shaddai yiten lachem rachamim. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, that he may send your other brother. Send your other brother. Who's the other brother? Rashi says the text is sufficiently ambiguous to mean, well, it could mean Shimon, maybe Achichem means Shimon, and Acher, back of his mind, maybe Joseph. But Yaakov, Jacob, is invoking God's name. Now, skip to next week's Sedra. The brothers, Joseph announces his identity to his brothers. They're in shock, and he tells them, do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me here. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. So it wasn't Jacob who sent him. It's God who sent him. And even the brothers, he says, no, it's God. And he says again, God sent me ahead of you to enjoy your survival and to save your lives. It's a famine. So it's not you who sent me here, he says, but God. And he's made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler of all the whole land of Egypt. We've gone from people acting out their lives, God's getting no mention in it, and we're moving to the end of the story. This is now the end of the saga of Joseph and his brothers. Well, almost. And Joseph is attributing everything to God. And even Jacob, when he sends Binyamin for the first time, he talks about God's involvement. This takes us back to the first theme, of course, that God is a partner. And finally, with these three words, and briefly with the word pakad. So this word occurs 10 times during the Joseph story. He's appointed to run Potiphar's house, to look after prisoners in jail. He recommends that Pharaoh appoints people to help organize the grain storage during the years of plenty. But just as he realizes that God is doing the sending, so Joseph realizes that God is the true leader, not him. This is what he says at the end of his life. It's very powerful and very moving. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm dying, but God will grant you special providence, and that is pakod yifkod. Rabbi Ari Kaplan translates it this way: special providence, and bring you up from this land to the land about which he swore to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yosef made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will grant you special providence, and you'll bring up my bones from this. Powerful stuff. Joseph comes to realize the whole story, all the dreams, the coat, the clothes, the Potiphar, the prison, everything is divine providence. We've seen that it's a combination of people's choices and God guiding the way. We sidestepped to see the role of clothes, and even we saw Joseph as a metaphor for our history. We've seen that key words guided us to Joseph's conclusions, and therefore his magnanimity to his brothers. But there is a massive but that we have not touched tonight. We've not dealt with tonight. If Joseph comes to this conclusion, look how he speaks his brothers in next week, etc. We've seen the verses. What does he say? You didn't send me, God sent me. Don't be upset. So what's the problem? Do you know? Last week, Cedra ended on a cliffhanger. Joseph's in jail. The butler forgets him. What's going to happen? And today we've got Pretty Mashim. We've got access. Once upon a time, people went to shul once a week on Shabbos, and they heard the reading. They heard the translation, but they had nothing printed. What's going to happen to Joseph? Is he getting out of jail? And this week, if you think last week was a cliffhanger, this week more so. The cup is found in Binyamin's sack. Judah turns around, and by the way, the brothers are all cut kriya. It's like someone's died. They all cut kriya. They tear their clothes. They are so upset. And they brought back to the town. They stand in front of Joseph. And Judah, who's by now become the leader of the brothers, says, Man o ma, man rabeh, man istadak. What can we say? What can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God has found our sin. We're all slaves to you. And Joseph said, no, that's not necessary. The one in whose sack the cup has been found will be a slave to me. And the rest of you go home in peace to your father. And that's the end of the Sedra. And if this was a soap opera, the music would have started playing, and you've seen, the accreditations. And you can't fail to watch the next episode. What is going to happen next? But that's actually not my point. My point is this. If Joseph really understood that they didn't send him, God did. If he really understood that he's not even the leader, God is the leader. If he really understood that there's something called brotherhood, and it seems like he does, why was he so nasty to his brothers? Why did he put them through the torture? And Binyamin, what did he do wrong? Binyamin gobleted his sack. Really? Why? And why, oh why, oh why, did he not send word all these years to his father? You know, the time he was in jail, okay, they didn't take letters from jailbirds in those days. But he's viceroy of Egypt for 9 years before his father comes to Egypt. Why didn't he send words? So, here's the but. Well, let's go away from the but. Actually, no. Let's not forget the shocking turn of the events. So here I've summed it up. 2 concluding questions. If Joseph really sees everything that happened to him as God's will, how can he do this to his brothers, especially Benjamin? Which leads us to the bigger question. Why at any time during the 22 years as he was sold into slavery, did he not send word to his father? What's the answer? Well, just as Mikate ends on a cliffhanger and says, find out next week, I'm going to do the same thing. Please join me again next Tuesday night and we'll have some answers.